Welcome back to In His Mind. So, this is a very controversial topic. So, what I'm saying here, I will definitely include some links down below for you to check out. But I do want to start this off by saying that this is biblical slavery, not modern slavery. That's what this focus is going to be on. And yes, there is a lot of areas to cover here if you were to go into all aspects of this. But for the most part, it's going to be focusing on just what is talked about in the Bible. Chattel slavery definition and meaning. So that is one of the main aspects here, and there's others that I'll be bringing into play right after this. The definition of enslaving and owning of human beings and their offspring as property, able to be bought and sold, and forced to work without wages, as distinguished from other systems of forced, unpaid, or low wage labor. This is a form of slavery. By the way, I want to say that I have this up here where does the Bible condone slavery? Now, one of the things that I hit upon that made me very interested in this was the fact that I had wondered about this myself and looked into it, but came across something entirely different. And that is anything that can be monetized will be monetized. So if money can be made off of it, it will be. The free market, free will, it's all tied together, along with the ability to go out and sell something or get value out of it. Because if you can't sell something, what's the next thing you can do, with it or to get something out of it? Send that question your way so you can think about that some. Now, there's some scholars who believe that there are more slaves now than there ever were in the past. I'm not sure how many years that they're referring to. It could have been the past 100 years or so, but that is not made clear. Moving on, I just saved this one part just because of that right there. The Bible and slavery. I already have that up right here. Wikipedia is not the best source. It really isn't. But there are other ones out there. Now, I do have some Bible verses that do. I have them up here. So I'll be reading from those as well. Starting in the beginning here. Let's start from some of the earlier parts here to give you some idea of where things came from. Slavery in the ancient world, from the earliest known recorded evidence in Sumer to the pre-medieval antiquity Mediterranean cultures, comprised a mixture of debt slavery, slavery as a punishment for crime, enslavement of prisoners of war. Now, I do want to say in the Bible, it does talk about quite a few times where God commanded the Israelites to put the men and all the women and the children to the sword. So it wasn't always just simply you could take what you want. There was also you must kill, you must do this, you must do that. In some cases, the Israelites ended up sinning by allowing greed to infiltrate their ranks, and they kept some of the gold and silver for themselves, which was punished by having the Israelites die from disease and such. That, I believe, is tied to the bronze snake that was put on the staff and raised, that if they wanted to be healed, they had to look upon that. There's some interesting aspects talked about as far as like what happened if the Israelites had failed the test of God when he said, you go out here and do this, you got to make sure you do all of this. Now, most of this comes from Moses during the time when they were between the time of when they were in the desert, after they were freed from the Egyptians and before they moved into the Promised Land. The Promised Land was a little bit different because they shifted over from traveling to setting up 2 locations and then waging war on the neighboring countries to take over that land. So I would imagine that this is more in effect later on rather than simply when they're traveling from Egypt to the Promised Land. So chattel slavery would also include the blood slavery, which would be children born into slavery. They were considered to be children of the master of the house. Now, it seems that there are some reports about having some of the slaves involved with the household to some degree, as far as like raising the sons and the daughters, or using the daughters, the females. There's a lot to be said about that. I'm not even sure where to talk about that, so I probably won't because it's not even in the Bible as far as that goes. Offering up children, when some of the instances talking about the children being offered up, it's strictly tied to that of the worship of idols and false gods, of worship of Baal. Yeah, there's that. The one time where blanking on his name all of a sudden, but he made a promise to God, and he said he would offer to God the first thing that came from his doorway, which happened to be his daughter. He was one of the judges. I'm blanking on his name. Gideon. I think it was Gideon. Gideon and his daughter. He had just won a war, and he was very proud when he made that. and he ended up regretting it for the rest of his life. So it's understood that he didn't kill his daughter so much as dedicated her life, and that she mourned for the rest of her life because she would never actually, have a family of her own. So yeah, still trying to find out some of this. The Roman Empire, like Code of Uranami, the oldest known surviving law code, written in 2100 all the way to 2050 BCE, including laws relating to slaves during the third dynasty of in Sumerian Mesopotamia. It states that a slave that marries cannot be forced to leave the household, and that the bounty for returning a slave who has escaped the city is 2 shekels. It reveals that there are at least two major social strata at that time, those free and those enslaved. The Babylonian Code of Hammurabi, written between 1755 through 1750 BC, also distinguishes between the free and the enslaved. Like the Code of Urnamu, it offers a reward of 2 shekels for returning a fugitive slave, but unlike the other codes, states that harboring or assisting a fugitive was punishable by death. This goes all the way back to the Babylonian times, possibly even back further. So there's definitely a lot there. Having records, more records would be nice. And for future reference, I may come back here, and I would like to come back here and just write down everything that's relatable to this, and just do a final cut. Right now, this is the first cut, and it is what it is, but I will do the best I can here, put down the information that I know, that I found, that which applies to the biblical aspect here. Simply put, I believe that the biblical aspect of slavery is there to help support those who are in need. As in, there are some rules as far as the stipulations, like you cannot sell your countrymen into service. You can't. You have to take care of not the wives, but you have to take care of the wives of the deceased husbands. I'm blanking on their names all of a sudden. Maybe just because it's getting late for me. You have to take care of the widows. Excuse me. So you have to take care of the widows, and in the seventh year, the year of Jubilee, you have to set your captives free, unless they want to be permanently bonded to you. And then there's a process which involves piercing the ear. Like, apparently you could love your master enough where you just want to stay with them. But the idea there that I stumbled across years ago was that in order to pay off debts and any sort of bills that would have popped up back then, for those who are unable to make a living through whatever, like old age or through an accident that has left them crippled, slavery was a way to actually take care of them. And that stuck with me for months, and I couldn't get out of my head. It's just like I had to look more into this. Yet this topic bothers me greatly. It bothers a lot of people greatly. Just because, like, if you don't hit this perfectly, you're going to be looked at it in a very poor way. I want to make sure I take my time to cover the important parts, but I also realized I didn't need to cover everything. So it took me a long time to just work through a lot here. Just get some stuff here, not just simply get that particular direction. The biblical part, and I do need to go back over here, I think, not this part. War captives. Going into slavery, there's different topics. You can also talk about different countries too, not just the different time periods. So in this particular part with the Bible, with focus on Egypt, or rather when the Israelites were freed and were moving to the promised land after their time in Egypt, you're talking about war captives, possibly fugitive slaves, but that was set up later with the 12 tribes of Israel, where there were 2 cities that were set up as refuge, places where slaves could run to and not be persecuted. They were basically, you had to stay there and until you died, and then you would never be hunted again as long as you stayed there in those 2 cities. There was almost no information on them in the Bible as far as like what they did and all that. It's just like, here's 2 places, boom. Blood slavery, but there's very little that talks about that. And again, I already mentioned about those who were born into slavery. The male Israelite slave had been given a wife by his owner, then the wife and any children which had resulted from the union would remain the property of his owner, according to the covenant code. And that is a name given by academics to a text appearing in the Torah at Exodus chapter 20, verses 22 through 23. Or more strictly, the term in the covenant code may be applied to Exodus chapter 21, verses 1 through 22. Biblically, the text is the second of the law codes given to Moses by God. And there's more. So I'll put these links down below so you can check them out. Adam Clarke, let's see, 18th century theologians John Gill and Adam Clarke suggested that this referred to the Canaanite concubines. But there's definitely a lot there for sure. Debt slavery. Debt slaves was one of the two categories of slaves in the ancient Jewish society. As the name implies, these individuals sold themselves into slavery to pay off debts they may have accrued. That is the part that actually stuck with me. I was just like, light bulb. And I started putting two and two together because this is not talked about in church at all, period. Debt slavery. Like they talk about slaves as in strongholds, addictions, and sexual stuff in your life that you need to be free of. And there's a process for that because, yes, there can be demonic parts. For example, there's someone who I talked with who believed he struggled with same sex issues and desires and all of that, including a lifestyle, until he was freed when he basically renounced all activity and he kicked all the demons out of his life because he believed that there was a demonic presence in there. So once he rejected all spiritual interference in his life and basically told whatever that was in his life to leave, he felt free. And this was the very first time that I heard that anyone who was struggling with any sort of same-sex addiction, attraction, or whatever, the homosexuality, if you want to talk about it like that, if you want to call it that, that's the first time I ever heard of there actually being a possibility of it being tied to any sort of demonic activity. And that's just an example. So, yeah. Moving on. Debt slaves. As the name implied, yes. Okay. These individuals were not permanently in the situation where usually released after 6 to 7 years. Chattel slaves, on the other hand, were less common and usually prisoners of war who retained no individual right of redemption. These chattel slaves engaged in full-time menial labor, often in domestic capacity. Like the rest of the ancient Near East, the legal systems, Israelites divided slaves into different categories in determining who should benefit from their intervention. The legal systems drew two important distinctions between debt and chattel slaves, and in between native and foreign slaves. The authorities intervened first and foremost to protect the former category of each, citizens who had fallen on hard times and been forced into slavery by debt or famine. So, in short, there were definitely rules as far as this is what you can and cannot do, and if you do this, you're going to have to pay the price for that. I want to say Numbers has quite a bit of that in there. So you could look at quite a bit as far as how that works. But as far as the biblical slavery, there's a lot sexual and conjugal, I can't say the word, conjugal slavery. These were two words. By the way, up until I started looking into this, I never even saw that word before. These were two words used for female slaves, which were Alma and Shafa, based upon the uses in different texts. The words appear to have the same connotations or are used synonymously, namely that of being a sexual object, though the words themselves appear to be from different ethnic origins. Men assigned their female slaves the same level of dependence as they would a wife. Close levels of relationships could occur given the amount of dependency placed upon these women. Plus, the buildings that they lived in weren't exactly that big, too. And I want to say that with some of the aspects on focusing on worship with gods, there were temple, I don't even know what their names were, but they were like temple, these women who would be working in a temple as essentially prostitutes, escorts, and they would be communing with their god, and there was definitely a lot there. So this is normal, this is common, this is treated as every day. This is not what it is in today's world where it's just like basically it does not exist unless you're talking about the whole forced aspect, of slave. I'm blanking on the name of that. Anyway, this is not like today's world where slavery is underground. I'll just leave it there. Okay, sexual use. These slaves have two specific roles: sexual use and companionship. And there is definitely some verses talking about this. I want to say before the 12 tribes of Judah, or around the time that they were setting up, there was a man, I want to say it was Judah himself, who had promised a woman to someone else. I think it was his son, and he ended up sleeping with her. And there was a very interesting story that talked about it, how he had promised to come back for her and had given her part of his outfit his tunic and I think his belt. It was a very interesting story that talks about that. It was a little bit of deception there about who was actually deceiving who there. Don't remember the verses. It was just some small story. Very interesting. So talk about female companionship. I think, you know what, now that I think about it, this was tied with her being denied a husband and that she wanted to have a child. But I believe Judah had lied to her. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And that basically, at the very end of it, he admitted his mistake and it was made right eventually. I don't remember how it ended, but it was a very interesting story as far as like this part. But she was not a slave. She had basically looked like the part of a temple prostitute alongside the road. Marriage with these slaves was not unheard of or prohibited. In fact, it was a man's concubine that was seen as the other and shunned from the family structure. These family slaves were treated more like women than slaves, which may result, according to some scholars, due to their sexual role, which was particularly to breed, quote unquote, more slaves. And that ties in with standing as far as like how popular you are, how much authority and power you had, and this could be tied to quite a bit back in the day, just because this is a status symbol. The more you have, the more you are, the more of a legacy that is yours. This was treated as if, this is property, this is yours. So, in that sense, there's a lot there. The Bible just doesn't talk much about that per se. It just says, here's a bunch of rules and restrictions, and this is what happens when this happens, and all that. Like, this is a consequence. It's almost as if, like, this is throughout all of time. I don't think that is the case, though. But after the one video, this is a bit of a sidetrack, but after the video that I saw about, how Cain, who back from Genesis, who killed Abel, how did he have a kid? It's basically been thought of, well, it's probably with his sister when the rules for having families was different back then. It's just like, you got a whole bunch of questions like, was slavery tied to greed? Was it tied to, oh man, there's just like a whole bunch of questions there. And on top of that, there's another video, and not going down a little bit further with the side trail here. Another video, as far as that I saw, that I linked, and I put a post on it, as far as like the first sin wasn't, when Adam and Eve fell, the first sin wasn't taking a bite from fruit, it was sexual. And there was a couple reasons that listed down why this was a possibility: covering up the private parts and being ashamed of themselves were two major parts. And I was like, why was this never talked about? Because this is like this is like, boom, this makes sense. But having the serpent cursed as far as the snake in the form, because it went further as far as like Eve sleeping with Lucifer, or at least I think that's what it was. And whatever it actually is, the idea that sexual sin is the first sin, which could be tied to slavery, is something that, again, I need to look more into, because this is just like, it blew my mind. I had never considered that. But considering that slavery could be used to support those who can't support themselves, I stumbled across this and I was like, let's talk about it. No one else in the church is doing that. And you know what? I can't blame them, because this is one of those things that like gets people hot and just hot and bothered and upset and angry, and just like they can't take this. That's why I'm like, the emphasis here is on the biblical part, not on anything else. And yes, when I did look into it, slavery exists in almost literally every part of the world. It's not like it's only focused here in America. It's all over. And the worst part seems to be in Africa, as in countrymen selling each other out into slavery itself. It's awful. It's straight awful. Because this is almost like family or extended family to a point. This isn't, anyway, moving on. Still here, the sexual and the conjugal slavery part. Sexual slavery, being sold to be a wife, was common in the ancient world. Throughout the Old Testament, that taking multiple wives is recorded many times. And that is one of the things that I had wondered about, was slavery actually tied to marriage, as in you have multiple wives, but there's only like one or two women that you're actually technically married to, because concubines were all over in the Bible, literally all over. And in fact, one of King David's sons was wives to go sleep with his concubines in public to become a stench, quote unquote, to David. And this was when David was fleeing, and I believe it was Absalom. I think it was Absalom who had to do that, but I could be wrong. Man, he has like 5 kids. Tamar is one of his daughters. Tamar, with that story about her being raped, that was definitely talked about quite a few times. The 2 sons, the one who killed the other, not talked about. I think there's some value there as far as King David fleeing for his life with his men, who at this point in time are past their prime for the most part. They're older, but they're trusted. They know how to fight. They have the skill. They have the experience. But they don't talk about like who actually supported Absalom. They don't talk about that. Anyway, all these little side trails are very interesting. Concubines, ooh, good stuff, right? I say good stuff as in like this is interesting stuff. Valued within the rules within the family. Marriage with these slaves were not unheard of or prohibited. Okay, moving on, moving on. An Israelite father could sell his unmarried daughters into servitude with the expectation or understanding that the master or his son could eventually marry her, as in Exodus 21, chapter 21, verses 7 through 11. It is understood by Jewish and Christian commentators that this referred to the sale of a daughter who is not arrived to the age of 12 years and a day, and this through poverty. And if a male man sells his daughter to be a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. This is part from scripture. If she does not please her master, who has betrothed her to himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt deceitfully with her. And if he has betrothed her to his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, her marriage rights. And if he does not do these 3, then she shall go out free without paying money. And it goes as far as saying, like, you go out and you take this woman by force. You have to pay for her. And on top of that, you are stuck with her for the rest of your life. Good luck. And it's like, in some cases, it almost treats like the virgins like slave or not. If you do not obey any of this, you're going to be cut off at the very least, or stoned or killed. It is ridiculous how everything was set here to protect the women, to protect the slaves. Doesn't matter what kind of slave, at least as far as the biblical context goes. It was never separated as far as the different types of slaves. It was just lumped under slavery, slavery. That was basically it. This also could be tied to translation as well. Like the different translations would refer to them in such a way. That could be the case too. The code also instructs that the woman was to be allowed to be redeemed if the man broke his betrothal to her. If a female slave was betrothed to the master's son, then she had to be treated as a normal daughter. So there's some interesting stuff here. I'm not going to read everything, but I will read some of the important stuff. The verses: Deuteronomy 15:12, Jeremiah 13:14, in which both male and female Israelite servants would be given release in the 7th year, the year of Jubilee. The penalty of an Israelite engaged in sexual activity with an unredeemed female slave who was betrothed was that of a scourging, with the Jewish tradition seeing this as only referring to the slave, where both parties were stoned, being free persons. Deuteronomy 22:22, as well as the man confessing his guilt and priest making atonement for his sin. Yeah, permanent enslavement. Like, there's a lot here. Ooh, as that last part, like I said, it hits hard because the whole thing is like you mess up badly enough, you're going to get killed. Permanent enslavement. As far as Israelite slaves, the covenant code allows them to voluntarily renounce their 7-year manumission and become permanent slaves, literally being slaves forever, including their kids, if I understand correctly. Maybe not, but this could just be tied to the individual himself and not his family. It doesn't specify, it doesn't talk about that. The law required that the slaves confirm his desire before God, a phrase which has been understood to mean at either a religious sanctuary before judges or in the presence of household gods. Because back then, I want to say when the Israelites were clearing out the other nations, There was one particular group that basically managed to bring them low because they were like, "We hear what you've done. We live so far away. Please don't kill us. We will serve you." And I forget what type of people they were, but basically, through an agreement, they were spared. And they, as a result, managed to help be a part of the reason why the Israelites shifted their focus from God onto household gods and other gods. Baal is a prime example there that was talked about. Um, and this is the Israelites were deceived and they were very furious when they found out, but they couldn't do anything because they had already promised. Like their word was their bond back then, and this was in the sight of God, if I understand correctly. Having done this, slaves were then to have an awl driven through the ear into a doorpost by their master. Let me see here. The ritual was common throughout ancient Near East, being practiced by Mesopotamians, Lydians, Arabs, and in the Semitic world. The ear symbolized obedience, much as the heart symbolized motion in the modern Western world, and a pierced earlobe signified servitude. But yeah, so permanent enslavement. This was, who knows how this was brought up, but basically this was something talked about as if you love your master and you do not want to go free, you could basically just be with him for the rest of your life. There's definitely a lot of love there for sure. Which when you hear the word love and slavery, you're like, wait, hold on a second. That doesn't sound right. Yeah, it's because it's not right. But then again, maybe something is done right because there's love involved. As in, you're taking care of me, I want to return the favor. Slave trade. Moving on. The Holiness Code of Leviticus. Let's see what's here. The Holiness Code is used in biblical criticism to refer to Leviticus chapters 17 through 26, and sometimes passages in other books of the Pentateuch, especially Numbers and Exodus. It is so called due to its highly repeated use of the word holy. Kadash is usually translated as holy, but originally meant set apart. Sanctified, sanctification, the process of being made holy. That's what it goes into as far as set apart. It's definitely some parts that were talked about in some of the Bible studies that I was a part of years ago. Very cool stuff, because the idea of holiness, and you talk about humans, which are fallible, we make mistakes and left and right. How does the two ever compare? Well, the process of being made holy, sanctification. All right. The Holiness Code of Leviticus explicitly allows participation in the slave trade. I would like to look more into this because how? How does this not conflict? How does this not, outside of what I said earlier about free will, everything has a monetary value that can and will be sold. Outside of that, I'm not exactly sure how the two can mix or even be in the same area. So need to do some more research about that. But interesting part. Okay. Participating in slave trade with non-Israelite residents who had been sold into slavery being regarded as a type of property that could be inherited. Working conditions. The Ten Commandments made clear that honoring the Shabbat was expected of slaves. Shabbat or Sabbath, also called Shabbos by Ashkenazim, is a Judaism's day of rest on the seventh day of the week. I'm having trouble saying this stuff. This is not words that I use on daily basis. On this day, religious Jews remember the biblical stories describing the creation of the heaven and earth in 6 days of redemption from slavery, and so on and so on. The rest is hidden. Yeah. Shabbat was expected of slaves, not just their masters. The later book of Deuteronomy, having repeated the Shabbat requirement, also instructs that slaves should be allowed to celebrate the Sukkot festival. Sukkot, let's see. Got to move this for a second. It's a Torah commanded holiday celebrated for 7 days beginning on the 15th day of the month of Tishrei. Tishrei or Tishrah. It is one of those three pilgrimage festivals in which those Israelites who could were commanded to make a pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, that's not ever talked about, but that's definitely interesting. I've never heard of that word either. I have not looked into any of this stuff either, outside of having all this interest pop up. So before this past couple months, nope. I just didn't touch this stuff. Leviticus instructs that during the sabbatical year, slaves and masters should eat food which the land yields without being farmed. Okay, yeah. Working conditions. The working conditions in the Bible talks quite a bit as far as the lay of the land, the fruits of the labor, and it's very different than what you find anywhere else. The command of the land must lie fallow. It must rest. The land must rest, which is tied to slaves and what they were supposed to do. So I guess they could be repairing, they could be purchasing, they could be upgrading. There's a lot of things you can be doing in a year other than just simply working the land. If you have livestock, maybe that means shifting them around to let certain areas grow some more. They had cows back then, they had other types of animals back then: horses, cows, goats, sheep, rams. They had a lot. They had a lot of animals back then. Let me see here. Unlike the other books, Leviticus does not mention the freeing of Israelite slaves after 6 years, instead, simply giving vague instruction that Israelite slaves should not be compelled to work with rigor. Maimonides, oh man, Moses ben Maimon, commonly refers to as Maimonides, also referred to by acronym Rambam, was a Sephardic Jewish philosopher who became one of the most prolific and influential Torah scholars of the Middle Ages. Oh boy. Argues that this was to be interpreted as forbidding open-ended work, such as keep doing that until I come back, parentheses, and that disciplinary action was not to include instructing the slaves to perform otherwise pointless work. A special case is that of a debtor who sells himself as a slave to his creditor. Leviticus instructs that in a situation, the debtor must not be made to do the work of slaves, but must instead be treated the same as a hired servant. So indentured servitude definitely is up there too. But slavery itself, very fair in a lot of ways and very interesting in the sense that there are rules to set apart to keep things as decent as possible. Injury and compensation, because again, slavery deals with that, deals with quite a bit of injury and compensation. That reminds me, I gotta look at my phone real quick. Because I took some notes down, I completely blanked out on it. Notes, and notes. Because I put down some notes here. Connections. Let's see. I'm seeing now that slavery is means to an end to God, aka the Creator. Yes, it's wrong morally. But on other levels, it acts like it is a vehicle as it carries out part of his will, which is largely spread across the world so that others may know of him and who he is. There are consequences for going this route, though, as this isn't the first way or the most natural way in going about connecting both others and God to others. Slavery itself seems to be like a vehicle, in other words, as in, this is allowed because it is a means to an end, and which this is something that can and will be used, not just by other people, but by the creator himself. And for someone who's made everything, who's familiar with everything, this could be seen as a bit like child's play because he knows how we are. And because he knows how we are, because he made us, he knows what we're going to do by knowing all the possibilities of what we could do. So certain things happen, he just puts in the future. Like, it's interesting how some things are set in stone as far as like this will happen, this event will happen, and then others, the event arrives a very specific way because there's intervention, with angels popping up in the Bible as far as being messengers, being protectors. And there was a very cool story, side topic, very cool story of this guy who's a missionary was talking about how there was a guy, I don't remember what his association was, but he had to go back into town to go get some more medicine. And basically, these two guys that he had ended up helping before leaving the city were going to go jump this guy and rob him and then kill him, taking his stuff. But when they followed him all the way back out of town before he had returned to the rest of the guys with medicine, they didn't do anything because they saw like 13 guards. And it turns out, and I am completely simplifying showing the story here, but as it turns out, people back in the United States felt a very strong urge to pray for these people. This wasn't in the town that they were going back. This man was going back to. This was all in the United States, and they ended up getting down and praying. So anyway, this guy goes back into town yet again later to get more medicine. He runs into the same two guys who just like open up and they're like, dude, we did not see this happening. And we were going to do this and this to you, but we saw all these cards with you. So basically, they were opening up how like they were going to do some stuff. And the whole thing was amazing because seeing angels in the form of humans as armed guards is not, it's new as far as what I'm hearing anyway. I want to say that this is not the first instance or story where you'd hear angels being around where humans are, like looking like them, being like them. Personally, there's a story I haven't shared yet, but Pastor Rick back in 2003 when I was going to boarding school in right outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania. This was part of Teen Challenge. Let me see here. This was an offshoot of Teen Challenge. I'm blanking on it because it was shut down in 2007, I believe, right before I joined the army. I think it's either 2007 or 2009. It did shut down a couple of years after I left, which was 2004. New Hope Academy, which was an offshoot of Teen Challenge, and I was the sixth or seventh guy to graduate from there. But anyway, the story there is that Pastor Rick, this guy who was invited to go talk, showed up and was talking about how he was saved from this one time he overdosed, and that this female who he remembers her body because it was very gorgeous, but he couldn't remember her face. She basically was coming down the stairs and then tapped him on his shoulder, and he woke up completely like free of the high, the after effects, and he basically regained consciousness. And because of that, he ended up making changes to his life, becoming a lot more healthy. It was definitely one of the only few stories I remember from back that time. And it's interesting to know that angels can take forms that are like us, without wings, without being any sort of scary, being described as scary as some people have seen them to be, which makes sense because you want something that can fight, not look like they're going to be weak or be ineffective, be not dangerous. Because angels are supposed to fight demons, right? So how can they fight if they look all cute and cuddly? Now, as far as in the Bible, there are some angels referred to as having multiple eyes all over, including under their wings. And it's just like you look up some of those pictures of angels with eyes all over, and it makes me feel uneasy. That's for sure. Probably makes you feel just as uneasy as that. But anyway, 3 different types of slavery: chattel, bonded, forced labor, and sexual slavery. That's like 4 right there. Slavery and history. Oh, I still haven't figured out how to talk about this, but basically, manumission in parallel with the Shemitah system. Yeah, this specifically excludes Israelite daughters who were sold into slavery by their fathers from such an automatic 7-year manumission. Yeah. Such were bought to be betrothed to the owner or son, and if that had not been done, they were to be allowed to be redeemed. So there's redemption talked about with slavery with the Israelites too. I do want to point that out. Oh man, stuff is all over the place. When I actually sit down to talk about this, I'm going to make sure there's a list, points, something that can be followed down below in the description. But as it is, I just simply did not want to talk about this, but I've been putting my foot down, and I was like, I just don't want to do this. This is not me. But in the end, I'm doing this because I need to do this. I want to do this. There's a lot here. When talking about biblical slavery, you can pull up verses left and right, in which I'm going to be moving on to. Not on this site anymore, I don't think. Yep, Philemon. The epistle of Philemon has become an important text in regards to slavery. Is used by pro-slavery advocates as well as by abolitionists. In the epistle, St. Paul writes to St. Philemon that he's returning to St. Onesimus, a fugitive slave, back to him. Returning, yeah. However, Paul also entreats Philemon to regard Onesimus, who he says he views as a son, not as a slave, but as a beloved brother in Christ. Oh, yeah, that has been talked about for many years. As far as I know, every single year is talked about. Doesn't matter the church. Children off. Okay, what's this main mission? Yeah, children often offer to creditors as a form of payment, and their main mission was determined. There's a bit of a picture that I saw as far as the Pony Express, where you could actually ship your children down there for like 40 cents, somewhere between 40 and 80 cents, which was interesting. I don't know why that popped up right now, but that's kind of funny because shipping your child by the Pony Express, really, I guess you could do that. Yeah. Oh boy. Okay. Da da da. First Peter, Book of Revelation. Okay, moving on to the next page. Slavery and Antiquity, main article. Slaves reporting a variety of different tasks. Oh yeah. They were the function, one of the main functions of slaves was to serve as status symbols for the upper members of society, especially when it came to the acquisition of dowries for their daughters. These slaves could be sold or given away as needed, and they also showed that the family was capable of providing generous amounts of money to their daughters when they were married off. And then you would have, hey, let's do these marriages and get benefits from them. Yeah, strengthening familial ties with other within families and groups and such. That is what Genghis Khan did with his daughters, as in with the neighboring countries. Like, there was marriage happening as far as making peace, but he would require, and I remember reading this was really cool, about he'd require the husband to come with him with their army to go conquer the others, and his daughters, their wives, to be left behind to manage the entire country. And that is how Genghis Khan had that area conquered and dealt with. Very interesting stuff. Moving on. I am not a big fan of Wikipedia as a whole, but there's definitely some good stuff here that you can look into with the verses. Oh, what is this? Non-Hebrew slave offspring with a perpetual property of the owner's family with the limited exceptions. The curse of Ham is an important passage related to slavery. It has been noted that the slavery in the Bible differs greatly from Roman and modern slavery, and that slaves mentioned in the Old Testament received sexual protection and enough food and were not chained, tortured, or physically abused. Yep, because they were treated like the best of the best property, so to speak. Like they were actually of value. And some people would actually debate whether or not slaves had more standing than women. I don't think so, because some of the older women actually had some property, some standing. But I think these were old widows, not the young women, the ones who had lived past their husband's death. Still, the Bible does not address that directly. At least the books in the Bible, anyway. There may be some books outside that refer to that, but I haven't looked much at the books outside the Bible. Oh, the Epistle to Philemon has many implications related to slavery. Yes. Alrighty. In ancient Egypt, slaves were mainly obtained through prisoners of war. Other ways people could become slaves by inheriting the stash from their parents. Lovely. People also sold themselves because they're poor and needed food, shelter. Yes. Let's see what else. Slave trading was not very popular until later in ancient Egypt. Afterwards, slave trade sprang up all over Egypt. However, there was little worldwide trade. Rather, the individual dealers seemed to approach their customers personally. Only slaves with special traits were traded worldwide. Yeah, you can talk about that all you want for sure. Special skills. And yes, there were special skills as skilled laborers, knowing which wood, cypress trees. There's other different craftsmen out there that actually had some decent skills that were high in demand because of what they could do. We're not just simply talking about on the sexual side here. Those would be kept and then, I guess, used on a daily basis. I'm not even sure what one would do with one. Oh boy. So they were more valuable because you could monetize them, as in, I will let you borrow this of mine for X amount of money or for other benefits. Like if I need something, you need to answer back, or trades of some kind, because not everything done back then was with money and currency. Favors, political favors, because they had those too as well. If you take a look, there are political favors that were earned through time, through trust, merit. Um, Nehemiah, when rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem, when he had asked to be taken leave of I want to say one of the kings, was it Persian needs? Could have been the Babylonians. I'm blanking out on this, but basically in Nehemiah, he got permission to go back from the king to go rebuild the wall, the place where he worshipped. And then there was a whole this is a bit of a side topic, but there was a whole sermon talked about the way that he presented it, because this was a place of worship, not like a city, not like a place that would challenge the king. Very cool as far as that goes. But he was allowed to go with an entourage and others because there was trust involved. No common slave would ever be allowed to go back to their place to go rebuild something because of the whole, I'm going to lose you, you're going to be gone. Yeah, well, this was tied to worship. This was tied to something that was tied to his God, who he believed in. And there was some very good stuff there. So anyway, that's a bit of a side topic as far as like earning favor and being worth something. Also, it was believed that Nehemiah was a bit of a taste tester too. So he had survived and he had done his job well enough, tasting the food, make sure there's no poison. Oh boy. Now, if what I saw on that YouTube short was accurate, there was also the royal hind wipers or whatever they're called in Egypt as far as wiping butts, making sure they're clean, and there was a position for that. And it also talked about laxatives being used. So laxatives and royal butt wipers. That is a skilled job. I can't even say that. It's so bad. Laxatives are the cure for everything. Anyway, I'll link all this stuff. You can take a look at this. This is just crazy. By the late 4th century BC, passages started appearing from other Greeks, especially Athens, which opposed slavery and suggested that every person living in a state had the right of freedom, subject to no one. Oh yeah, there's some definitely interesting stuff there. Anyway, Bible verse time, because this just keeps going on and on and on. Rome different from Greek city-states, yes, and it was definitely talked a lot about them, how allowed free slaves to become Roman citizens. You know, you work X amount of years, you do a good enough job, you can be free, you can be a Roman citizen, and there were a lot tied to that. Basically, saying that you were a Roman citizen guaranteed certain benefits. Paul himself used that. It's just like when he's being arrested, there was one time recorded, I think, could have been twice, but at least one time talked about how he had said he was a Roman citizen. So it's basically like they had to be careful, like almost gentle when arresting him. Like you couldn't just simply treat him like everyone else. It's crazy. Teachers, accountants, physicians were often slaves. Greek slaves in particular might be highly educated. Yeah, crazy stuff. All right, Bible verses. Oh, by the way, again, I'm gonna have to find some verses to put down below as far as like the topics of slavery, like the entire chapters and all that, not just simply these Bible verses here. Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is no male or female, for you are all one in Jesus Christ. The idea here is that no matter what your physical job or position is in this life, spiritually you are on the same level, which makes sense when you look at it from the whole point of like God caring about us all as a family, as a father would for his family. You know, like ultimately with slavery, it's people like you got to handle this right, or else you will be the one in trouble, and you will be judged far worsely than the slave ever will be. For freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. Galatians 5:1. Colossians 4:1, which actually deals with slavery. Masters, treat your bondservants justly and fairly knowing that you also have a master in heaven. Colossians, sorry, bond servants is another word for not necessarily slaves, but more like indentured servitude. Now, I think in a sense, slavery could be tied to the fact that everyone's accountable to someone. So, in that sense, no matter where you are on the food chain, so to speak, you, me, anyone else, the slave, whoever, you're accountable for your actions, you're accountable for your behavior. And according to some of the other, what are they called? The stories about the talents, parables. According to the parables that talk about the servants with the talents, like you are expected to use what you have and to make more with it, not just simply sit on and hide from it, but hide it on the ground until the master returns. Because there's two parables that talks about this. One of them is basically the servant who did nothing was lazy, and the other one basically was like, I hid it, I didn't do anything with it. That's keeping it very short. The others made small profits the with one of them making large, massive profits off of it. You know, like the idea that more will be given to those who can actually handle and do more with it. There's a lot tied with that. Like if you were capable, you're going to be having more because you're responsible and all that. This is interesting. Exodus 21:16. Whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death. Oh yeah, very interesting stuff. Leviticus 25, verses 44 through 46. As for your male and female slaves whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you. You may also buy from among strangers who sojourn with you and their clans that are with you, who have been born in your land, that they may be your property. You may bequeath them to your sons after you inherit as a possession forever. You may make slaves of them, but over your brothers, the people of Israel, you shall not rule one over another ruthlessly. Exodus 21:20 through 21. When a man strikes a slave, male or female, with a rod, and the slave dies under his hand, he shall be avenged. But if the slave survives a day or two, he is not to be avenged, for the slave is his money. Yeah, this is like, there's some very interesting things here as far as like protection and all of that. Like, the idea that is sold here is these aren't just property, but these are people recognized as being owned. Like, how do I put this? You go down to Walmart to go buy something, you see people in a particular area with different price tags or whatever. You go on, you go buy one, they're yours. However, there is basically like a sheet of like an operation sheet, like an instruction sheet. This is what you can and cannot do. You do this, you are found guilty. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, like back then, that's kind of what it was. Though they never describe as far as where what the conditions are like and all of that. Maybe it didn't matter. Now, as far as with the modern day slavery, they got cages and they had very poor conditions as far as living conditions. And I just found out, or rather, I heard, I haven't verified this, that there's a lot that came from slavery, possibly including BDSM, which I need to look into because I was just like, there's dominance there, submission dominance. Like, there's definitely points that do line up. I'm not going there, but that's in the back of my mind. I'm just saying that's interesting. That's basically it. There's a lot of verses here. I will put the page, I will put the links down below because that's like, this is crazy stuff. The history of slavery goes back years. The evidence of slavery predates written records. The practice has existed in many cultures and can be traced back 11,000 years ago due to conditions created by the invention of agriculture during the Neolithic Revolution, also known as the First Agricultural Revolution. Oh, geez. Ancient Egypt, ancient China, Akkadian Empire, Assyria, Babylonia, Persia, ancient Israel, ancient Greece, ancient India, Roman Empire, the Arab Islamic Caliphate. I can't even see some of the other ones. It's crazy. Child abandonment. Practice of relinquished interest in claims over one's offspring in an illegal way with intent of never resuming or reasserting guardianship. Yeah, won't even say what's happening in today's world about that. How men have to pay for children that aren't even theirs. Ooh, boy. Slavery in the 21st century continues and generates an estimated 150 billion in annual profits worldwide. Populations in regions with armed conflict are especially vulnerable. Modern transportation has made human trafficking easier. The internet has made human trafficking easier by connecting others. Maybe not necessarily directly, like, Facebook to Facebook page or whatever. It's not quite like that. But you definitely, I've heard anyway, that Instagram and some other places, even TikTok, there's definitely channels that are very subversive with, like, you have to look for specific details on how to, like, look for those who are on the black market trying to sell individuals, because sex trafficking is a very real thing. However, I think it's done here differently. I can't even say here differently. It's done differently when you got companies and corporations tied into it where they're trying to make money without actually like letting the people go to be rescued. That could be tied to escorts for all I know. I don't even know. Either way, human trafficking is a very real problem in today's world. Compared to the biblical times, it was basically a way of survival, monetary survival, like two different worlds, two different worlds. Forced labor, private sector, 38% lived in forced marriages, like prison labor, sex trafficking, sexual slavery. Like, it's crazy what this stuff goes into. The reason why I'm not talking too much about the history of slavery is because again, it goes straight from biblical to modern. Unless you're talking about where it came from, where it popped up from, the mass chattel slavery, like all of this stuff. Slavery features in Mesopotamian code of Hammurabi. I can't say this word. Hammurabi, 1750 BC, which refers to as established institution. Slavery was widespread in Egypt. Yeah, like it's crazy. Both Christians and Muslims captured and enslaved each other during the centuries of warfare in Mediterranean Europe. Islamic slavery encompassed mainly Western and Central Asia, Northern, Eastern Africa, India, and Europe from the 7th to the 20th century. 7th to the 20th century. Oh my word, this is crazy. Uh, Amazing Grace. That song popped up from a slaver who changed his ways and he realized what was going on. He's just like, there is so much that's tied to slavery as people both making money, people changing, turning their lives around. It's insane. Slavery is a mode, a vehicle, if you will, that is being used here. Like, when people are faced with the reality of human condition without any sort of anything better, they start praying. They want someone to intercede on their behalf for them. To my knowledge, there was very little of this ever back in the biblical times. There was no cry for being, saved, except for those who had conquered Israel as a whole when they had sinned, when they had basically turned their back on God, and God was like, suffer the consequences. As a whole nation versus a whole system of slavery, a whole system versus a whole country, two different time periods, two different ways of this going down. It's all very different, but they never talk about this in church. They never talk about this anywhere else. They don't talk about why this was needed. Anyway, I'm going to end here because there's just so much. This is a very heavy topic. Anyway, thank you for listening this long, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Next time.